Jonathan from the Crankshaft Journal, and today we're going to ride the 1982 Suzuki GS1100L. The L designation tags the bike as an early Japanese cruiser, part of an interesting chapter in motorcycle history. This bike was part of an attack, really, by the Japanese manufacturers on Harley-Davidson's position in the cruiser market. The Japanese had done very well through the 70s with sport bikes. The cruiser market had eluded them. One look at this machine and you can pretty much tell what their strategy was. Let's imitate Harley-Davidson's big teardrop tank, the stepped seat, the small wheel with a fat tire in the back, big wheel with a skinnier tire up front, sprinkle some chrome, and we're pretty much there. You're probably saying, hey, well, one thing they didn't imitate was the Harley-Davidson V-twin engine. That would go right here, and it would probably be getting most of your attention because it's the focal point of the bike. But the Japanese stuck with the four-cylinder engines that they had been developing for the past decade. Essentially, they figured more cylinders, more horsepower, certainly more sophistication would win the day. Now, the story tends to run on from here, but the short version is they got it wrong. However, there's nothing wrong with the bikes. In fact, if you're interested in vintage iron, a machine like this is a good way to get into it. They're lots of fun to work on, more fun to ride. In fact, let me show you. Let's go for a spin.
I like lots of things about early Japanese cruisers. Their looks, horsepower, attitude, and the way those elements come together to really capture the feel of an era. It was the early 1980s, and styles were in flux, whether you were talking about fashion, music, or transportation. As usual, the new decade hadn't quite found its identity and was still borrowing heavily from the previous one. Perhaps that's why our Suzuki seems to channel disco more than punk rock or new wave. Regardless of your playlist, the machine has a fun, flamboyant style that adds to the pleasure of riding. You absolutely will turn heads on this thing when you roll up to the curb. We would consider the Suzuki a power cruiser or muscle bike in today's vernacular, and it can run with Harley-Davidson Street Glides, Ducati Diavels, and other macho modern machines. For not a lot of money, you can have a really rich riding experience. I bought this bike for about $1,200 and rode it home. It was in good shape and didn't need anything. The seller was moving. He needed to clear clutter, and yes, the Suzuki had become clutter, partly because, well, he always wanted a Harley anyway. So my timing was good. You have to be a patient hunter. Once you start riding old iron, you'll become part of a community that generally doesn't care whether you're on a cruiser or whatever, as long as it's old. These people will help you find spare parts, tell you where the best riding routes are, and recommend good mechanics when you can't do the work yourself. If you like cruising through town or a casual ride in the country, well, this could be your bike, especially if you sometimes get tired of changing gears. The old Suzuki pulls well even when the engine slips below 2,000 RPM, even up a hill. We're talking major torque for a motorcycle. Overall, the Suzuki's excess of power makes it easier to ride in most situations. It cruises along happily at pretty much any speed from highway to driveway. The air-cooled engine, something you rarely see in new models, has a comforting, satisfying feel. You could almost call it warmth. It lets you know you're riding something mechanical but never seems rough or primitive. Fact is, the big GS engines were advanced for their time and hold up very well nearly 40 years on. This one still purrs. Find a nice example of an early Japanese cruiser if it suits your taste, and you won't have to sacrifice much compared with a new bike. These and other motorcycles from the 1980s feel reasonably modern compared with machines from the 60s and 70s. They require less tinkering and operate more like serious transportation instead of toys for eccentrics. You can save money and rack up style points if you care about that sort of thing, and who doesn't? There's an office building with mirrored windows in my town where people are always checking themselves out as they walk, ride, or drive past. It might be way too vain, but I do think the Suzuki and I look really sharp as we cruise by. So imagine the impression you'll make, how good you'll look making the rounds. Maybe the scariest thing about riding a bike like this is that some people will assume that you're cool, and you'll be under great pressure to prove them correct. Thanks for watching. You can read more about this bike and others on the Crankshaft Journal blog. Take care, ride safe.